What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and today we're going to be going over Murktide Regent, Blue Red Murktide, fun, happy stuff. Basically, a deck that we went over before, just kind of like a general overview and things like that. And obviously, with videos that I've recorded in the past talking about the four-color Elementals deck or four-color Yorion, Money Piles, etc., and them being very good and possibly needing banned, Murktide Regent you'll still find is one of the top trending decks in the modern metagame. And this video, while also kind of serving as a deck tech for, what went down in the Modern Challenge, first place, I'm assuming in the Sunday Challenge, because I believe Demonic Tutors won with Yawgmoth in the Saturday Challenge. And as you can see here, the Sunday Challenge also had two decks in the top eight, Murktide, or two different Murktide decks, like on the outside looking in at 9th and 10th place, and obviously two more within the top 26. So obviously this deck gets results. Definitely gets the job done, and it's probably easily one of the best decks in Modern, while not doing as, I guess, as cool or really as fancy things, but does have a very pattern that's, I think, very satisfying as a player. That kind of, once you just kind of get the ball rolling, it's kind of, it can snowball out of control, but also just makes you feel like a smart player without necessarily doing like really high brain things compared to like what you can do with some other decks and stuff. But before we get into that and we explain some more stuff with Murktide, I'd really appreciate it if you're new to my channel, uh, consider subscribing, ring the notification bell to see more videos like this as we break down modern decks, pioneer decks, go over some new decks in Modern and Pioneer, as well as just kind of like learn some stuff about like the format and have some discussions as things kind of go along. So with that out of the way, let's kind of dive into this Murktide Regent deck and explain exactly why this deck is as impactful as it is and why it's pretty deserving, I think, of at least being considered the number one deck and why players kind of play it as like the number one deck. So kind of like what the metagame is kind of shaped around, because it is such a powerful card. Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, is essentially one of two things for the modern format. It's either a must answer threat or you are playing the card. And the people that choose to play with the card obviously can leverage it in one of two ways. They can either do it because other people are playing decks like this, are playing like Mishra's Baubles and Expressive Iterations and things like that. And if you hit those kind of cards off of your opponent's library, it's very good. Like the fact that you just get like a fifth or a sixth copy of Mishra's Bauble or Expressive Iteration or what have you makes Ragavan very, very good. Obviously, can ramp you as well. You play this on turn 1, it connects. You have it on turn 3, and now with a new card printed like Ledger Shredder, that says when a player casts their second spell on each turn, it connives. You have turns where you can play Ragavan on turn 1, play Ledger Shredder on 2, and then play Consideror or Lightning Bolt, possibly even like an Unholy Heat, things like that. And you can just like kill another one of your opponent's creatures, like their Dork. They choose not to block your Ragavan. You can obviously consider to just kind of like dig in your deck just to get the extra draw with Ledger Shredder and things like that. And obviously put it up to 4 power or 4 toughness, 2 power, whatever. Definitely gets it out of bolt range. And if Murktide decks are playing 3 to 4 bolts in their main deck, that is just a spell that you're able to kind of get around. Um, so that's like the new kind of card that like these decks get is Ledger Shredder, which lets it dig more and dig for more gas and let it go down on lands. As you can see, playing 18 lands, most decks that are playing that many lands were like the old Death Shadow decks, and it's pretty weird looking at a deck that has Brazen Borrow as like a 3-drop, Archmage's Charm, so on and so forth. That it does get to get away with this because it gets to play like Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler to also kind of control your draws and things like that. Ledger Shredder is just like another piece of that puzzle that can just kind of get out of hand. You kind of want to cast your spells like at on your turn now with like Expressive Iteration, getting to draw some cards, and then like finding a Mishra's Bauble or even like a Consider or something like that to continue to go Ledger Shredder kind of as the game goes on, especially if you're able to cast 2 spells on your turn and your opponent's turn, and you just constantly get to cantrip. So obviously the deck is named after Murktide Regent and things like that. Um, this card's stupid. Obviously, being a 2 mana 8/8 is really good. It can dodge the Unholy Heats. It can dodge. obviously multiple like lightning bolts, things like that, but just a huge threat that is really difficult to answer if you can just play this thing, as an 8/8 and ends the game super quick, especially since nothing in combat can really block it unless they have a really huge Ledger Shredder. Um, so as I've kind of just explained, like the creature suite, the spells and stuff that kind of go with this deck, why is this deserving of a number one spot in the metagame? Well, it kind of checks off all the boxes. Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler can apply some very early pressure. Even Ledger Shredder, up to a point, can apply a lot of pressure, especially backed up by like turn one Ragavan and connecting with said Ragavan on turn two. While also getting to kind of choose its own gameplay. It can be a super aggressive deck out of the gate with Dragon Rage Channeler, Ragavan, Ledger Shredder, things like that. Or it can kind of play a control deck with the playset of counter spells, some Archmage's Charm, Spell Pierce, and things like that. In certain matchups, especially like the Spell Pierce being huge to kind of protect some of these early threats to play a more tempo game. It kind of does exactly what mid-range decks want to do, where they can choose to kind of be aggressive, tempo-y, or control-y, depending on what role they want to play. And while this deck definitely wants to lean towards more of the aggressive role playing Shredder, Ragavan, and Dragon Rage Channeler, it does, thanks to the help of like Counterspell and Iterations and Archmage's Charms and things like that, and even like with the removal and Unholy Heat and Lightning Bolt, you do kind of get to play a little bit of a control game if you're playing in the mirror to kind of like bait out and kill your opponents like Ragavans or Dragon Rage Channelers and things like that, even their Ledger Shredders, and just hopefully control them out, and then you can just play a Murktide naturally by casting some of these spells and stuff. So overall, like, and the fact that's like in the best colors, aka Fury, against like some of the other bigger creature decks and things like that, you kind of have a recipe for a deck that can do whatever it needs to do in the matchups it needs to do them in. Obviously, like the Elementals deck, uh, it doesn't matter if they're casting like Abundant Growths and doing things with like uh, their elementals and stuff like that, because unless they kill like a Murktide Regent, which again you're usually representing like counter spells and Archmage's Charms and things like that, uh, they need like multiple like Solitudes specifically to get rid of it, and especially when like your main thing is just like using counter spells and things like that instead of like removal, uh, you're less susceptible to cards like Ephemerate, where they can just try to resolve a Solitude and then Ephemerate it. Whatever they need to have Fury plus Ephemerate to kill a full priced Murktide, exiling 5 spells and things like that, or they need some other very specific cards, like they need to be able to somehow counter the counter spell, things like that and whatever. Which I guess is possible with Archmage's Charm, but really the fact that if you're just able to get them to waste cards, and put them very low on cards, and then force them to have to uh, cast Yori and Sky Noodle or whatever, you know, things like that. You put them in awkward spots where like they kind of just have to have it and hope that you don't have it, which you can easily have it with this deck, considering all the draws that you get from baubles and iterations and things like that. So that's my verdict on the Murktide deck. A little bit more in depth than like the regular deck tech that we normally have. Um, just to kind of summarize like the things that we pointed out, this deck is essentially like to me, an aggro control mid-range tempo deck, kind of like how the old Death Shadow decks were, where you could kind of choose the role where your opening hands can kind of dictate what you want to do, and obviously based on like your knowledge of the format, you are able to make mulligan decisions where maybe playing aggressive just isn't good for the matchup. You can mulligan to try to find some more like lightning bolts or unholy heats, maybe even like counter spells and spell pierces. Or if you have like a more controlly hand and you definitely want to be the aggressor in the matchup, you can mulligan till you find like Ragavan or Dragon Rage Channeler or some combination of the 2 or 3, including Ledger Shredder, and uh, essentially like force kind of your game plan that way, where you could play turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Ledger Shredder plus a Mishra's Bauble, and get some Connive trigger and a Surveil trigger as well, and just kind of like put the pressure on your opponent and really put them in awkward spots to have multiple pieces of removal, especially if you're like the Elementals deck or even the Even the Yawgmoth deck can have like a hard time just dealing with the Ledger Shredder because it just has a lot of toughness and obviously can shed some of those counters that get put on it. So that is Murktide Regent. Obviously, the deck is very powerful. Easily one of the top two, if not top three decks in the format. Would I recommend playing this deck? I would say if your knowledge of the format is relatively high and you're able to make some, or if you like being put in a position to make critical decisions and kind of like work through games as more of like a puzzle and can really understand like what you want to be doing in like certain matchups, I think Murktide is probably one of the best decks to pick for that fact that if you have vast knowledge of the format or even just enough to where like you can recognize like matchups that you're playing against and how you want to be in those matchups, um, then this deck is going to be very, very good and I think reward you a lot of the time for throwing back hands that are not good in certain matchups to try and get hands that are better equipped for certain matchups. And I mean, you can make that argument for any deck, but I think this deck in particular can reward you for um, disciplined mulligans like that. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like on the video. Again, subscribe and ring the notification bell if you have not already, so you know when I have other videos coming out. I usually cover Modern Pioneer specifically and topics within those things. But if you want to see like standard, historic, or legacy, things like that, I am definitely willing to dip my toe into that because I'm a big fan of Hogak, if you could not tell by like my last video, and I just really like talking about that card. But anyway, if you like more modern Pioneer stuff, go ahead, subscribe, ring the bell, and keep an eye out for those videos as they come out. That's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.